there's people here. All right, guys. I'll be right back. I'm gonna grab some coffee. Backwards. Do I need that light? Maybe I don't need that light. Do I need it now? Maybe I can find a better light. How is everybody? Oh, midterms. Hee. What other classes are you guys taking? Get some cool lighting in here, huh? Come on, lights. Oh, that's better, I think. All right. Okay. 11:33. How is everybody? We got some thumbs up. Yay, good. I'm excited too. How'd you guys do this week? It was like all reading. Don't worry, we're gonna watch some videos now. It'll be fun. Oh, yeah, that's right, Audrey. Is it the time switch that made it easier for you to get here, or just random?
Well, before it was like today was supposed to be, usually Fridays are like my homework heavy day. But I think going to the Zooms will help me understand the material better. So
I hope so. It should be fun. I'm actually, now that we've been doing this for a few weeks, maybe this is a good time to ask you guys, do you think it would make a difference if we did them early in the week rather than later in the week? Emotionally, do you think it would be easier to come if it were early in the week? I mean, ideally in a college course, the idea is that you guys get to do your reading first, and then we come to these discussions and you get to talk back and ask questions and say like, why did we read that? That was terrible. Or this is my favorite thing in the world. So I'm always a little bit divided about whether to schedule them earlier or later in the week. I feel like later in the week, it gives us all time to make sure we've done the homework. But I don't know, maybe if it was early in the week, it would feel more, I don't know, exciting. What do you guys think? There's no wrong answers here. I'm really honestly like, I would love to hear your opinions on that. Y'all are on mute.
I mean, personally, for me, I don't know about anyone else, but I kind of like where it's at right now. I mean, personally, for me, I'm kind of like just everywhere, like Monday through Thursday, and I feel like Friday is just like a really nice like change of pace and stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's three of us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's just me. I don't know if I can speak for like everyone else, but yeah.
Here's another thing that I consider but haven't done is, so if we were meeting in person, then I would have you in my clutches. One of the ways that a lot of my professors have led class that I really liked is that when you show up to class, the first thing you do is do a written assignment. And that could be like that you answer specific questions, which feels more like a quiz that kind of like keeps you on top of your game in terms of the writing. My favorite version of this was Abby Kai's version. She's now teaching with us at Skyline. She is a professor that I had for some grad classes at Mills, and I just thought she was so fabulous that when I went on maternity leave, I was like, come to my program. So her in-person process is that when you show up, everybody writes about the reading for the week, and it is a way for her to check to make sure that folks are keeping up. Also because it helps the lecturer know if we need to like summarize more or less in the process so that we're not just babbling to ourselves, right? Which is nice. But it's also nice because when it's a free write, you can really focus on something that stuck with you. And it's not my expectation that you get through these readings, which are hard readings. Like, I'm not just giving you high school textbooks, which is what a lot of these classes start out as, or, well, there's not that many dance history classes available. More and more are becoming available. But I feel like probably as a junior college student, your experience with reading about art is probably like high school textbook reading and I'm trying to give you some like real articles, which I'm sure you've read real articles from the Smithsonian before, but also you've noticed sometimes I put in some like hardcore academic stuff. And so I just want to reiterate that my expectation is not that you guys should get through all of that each week and feel like you understood it all. But my hope is that you have scanned through it and gotten a gist of what it's about, or at least come to discussion with some genuine bafflement and questions, or some like excitement about something having clicked and really made sense, if that helps you understand what my hope is. Yes, no, maybe?
So are you like kind of recommending that we do like written assignment or written like assessments every time we join early on in the lecture moving
No,
forward?
I'm saying that I have chosen not to assign those to you.
Oh, okay.
But it would be great if your approach to coming to discussion was to come with a question. I guess that's a better way of putting it. Oh, Zoom. I better put on spotlight, huh? It's like switching to folks who are just going, oh, wrong button. Sorry. I meant this button. Okay. So that said, I'm going to try and blow through this pretty quickly. As I said, I switched the time today so that because of childcare, blah, 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 car maintenance, life getting in the way. And I just wanted to make sure that we got to this week's stuff because it's all heavy reading. And so my job today is kind of to illuminate some of that reading for you. And we're going to start with video. Yay, fun. Does anybody have any questions? I'm super excited. I saw Crystal said that tap dance was harder than you thought. It's exhausting, isn't it? So I'd love to come back to just check in with that at sort of at the end, just to have like a live chat back, because yay, fun dancing for reals. And in the meanwhile, yay. Did you try the tap last week, Audrey? While I start our video?
I was working on it. I still have to get that in, but I remember like when I first learned tap, when I was in a musical in high school, it was just the best.
It's so fun. It's like, anyway, I'm going to not get sidetracked. All right. So first thing we're going to do is start out with, you've seen some of these clips before, but this is from the PBS documentary on vaudeville. And it's talking about the switch between, well, it's just a draft. It's talking about the switch between white vaudeville, white minstrelsy, and when the Reconstruction was ending and Black artists began to be able to take over those stages. And so you'll notice a lot of the reading this time is about the Whitman Sisters, who were a Black vaudeville touring company. And this question of the racial stereotypes that had been created and constructed by white vaudeville, and how the Black artist had to sort of take them on in order to take over the economic opportunity that allowed them to break free from the extreme poverty that they had been living in, and to try to make themselves, I don't want to say make themselves equal, because they were of course equal. All humans are equal, but to take their place in American society after so much and continuing so much racism. So that's sort of where we're starting out. I'm going to let PBS do some talking because they of course have great visuals. So you've seen a little part of this already, and but I'm going to let it go on a little bit so you can hear from some Black vaudeville audio. Oh, wait, no, I don't want that. So you can hear from some Black vaudevillians themselves from their own words, who are probably going to speak more clearly than I am today. Let me sip my coffee in the meanwhile, huh?
Blacks had little power to protest their characterizations, although many tried. Whites could parody them, but they could parody no one but themselves. Eventually, African Americans formed their own minstrel companies, billing themselves as real Negro delineators. Whites couldn't compete with their authenticity and often their talent, so they turned their own minstrel shows into vaudeville, but blackface characterizations were still an essential part of the act. That's what the minstrels are here for, so gather and cheer for a grand old minstrel band. At the same time, African Americans were being lynched by the hundreds and shunned by mainstream society. They were the subjects of the most popular music of the time, so-called coon songs, that, like minstrel shows, depicted Black life as free, careless, and non-threatening to anyone. Whites were led to believe that this young man's sole desire was to sing and dance for them.
If I saw a blackface performer at that time, I guess I was in my early teens on vaudeville. I didn't think anything of it because it was the time that I was living. It was the late 20s. I can look back now. I dislike having to say this, but I realize my mother and father were bigots. But I think everybody in Chicago were bigots.
Sitting by the river on a summer evening, listening to the darkest hum.
White vaudevillians maintained that white fantasy begun during minstrel times, that separate but equal was okay with Mammy, and that Blacks were simple, happy creatures who loved to entertain and had lots of time to do it, with just a little cotton picking here and there between fish fries and steamboat arrivals.
Listening to the steamboat blow.
The myth lasted a very long time, as Topsy and Eva, vaudeville's Duncan sisters, were still working it in 1960. The Duncans were the last minstrels. Real African Americans were forced to go along with the myth by wearing ridiculous or stereotyped clothing on stage, and only playing versions of Sambo or Zip Coon.
Because Sambo was the willing retainer. He was that slave who would sing songs like Carry Me Back to Old Virginia. On the other hand, Zip Coon then becomes an aggressive Black man who's still ignorant, but is pretentious.
Black performers almost always had to be in a racial context.
I don't know why I feel this way.
Eunice Wilson sings a fine number that has nothing to do with fruits and vegetables. So why does she have to do it in front of giant watermelons?
I remember once I had added a wonderful song called Shoe Shine Boy to my repertoire. And it was a perfect song for a kid of 12, 13 to sing. And I sang this song. I had an arrangement up with an orchestra and so forth. And I was booked into the Oriental Theater in Chicago. And there was a wonderful theater with a wonderful line of chorus girls and a great choreographer and producer and so forth. And when she heard about the colored boy coming to work at the theater, her mind began to click apparently. And when I got there, she had a whole big production number about Shoe Shine Boy. And of course I was in it. And I had to give up my nice arrangement. And then perform in her production, which included running up and down the chorus girls in front of them with a shoe shine cloth and shining their shoes. And my nice white tail suit had been tossed aside, and I was wearing some kind of stylized version of tatters and rags. That was my final week in vaudeville.
Now I remember as a kid, hold on there now Sapphire done told me that you owes me a nickel.
And I used to go like, why do you talk like, to my mother, why do you talk like that? The white performers who did minstrelsy did not really do black comedy at all. I mean, the jokes had nothing to do with blacks whatsoever. They were basically gags that were taken, and they were of show business origin. They were riddles and gags taken from the northern stage. When blacks came in, you had the emergence of an authentic form of black entertainment, although they still veiled it with the stereotypes that had been set up by the white performers.
The definition for acting is to do. All of this is an act.
Leonard Reed is an African-American who played in both all white and all black vaudeville.
I told you why they put on cork. Not to be black, but to get the expressions from the face. When you put on cork and white lips, you can move your lips around and everybody can see them moving around, and that's a laugh. And I think anything that you can do to get a laugh should be in show business. Show business is show business.
And I think that burnt cork for a lot of those vaudevillians was a mask so that when they came off stage, they could disappear into the crowd and nobody would know who they were.
Almost all the black comedians before 1950 wore blackface, even for black audiences. In the beginning, they had to.
Yeah, let me tell you about that bull of my father. You see, right,
But some wanted to, like the great comedian Dewey Pigmeat Markham.
5 o'clock. And that bull is so fast and so smart. Every afternoon about 5 o'clock, he goes way up to the far end of that pasture and race that train 5.5 miles.
Oh, yeah?
Would you believe it? That bull beat that train by 1/2 mile.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Some bull.
I know it's some bull.
And when Pigmeat took off his cork, he lost the edge that he had in laughter. I said, Pigmeat, what's happening? I said, the bit isn't going. He said, I don't know, I can't express myself anymore. He said, they made me take off the cork, and the cork was not to prove that I was black. They knew I was black. He said, but Negro, that's what he said, but I just lost the edge. I can't feel like I felt when I had the cork on. And he was brokenhearted till the end. Pigmeat was brokenhearted till the end that he had to take off cork.
Pigmeat Markham was one of the last American performers to take off the mask. His fans were surprised to discover that his face was darker than his makeup. He had been lightening up, not blacking up, for 40 years. In mainstream vaudeville, only one black act was allowed per show, if that. But black performers did have a place to work and learn their craft, the Toba circuit.
The TOBA circuit consisted of a whole black theater circuit starting with Chicago Grand Theater to St. Louis to Kansas City to Tulsa to Oklahoma City. I get excited just thinking about, realize this has been 70 years ago since I did these.
All right, so let me come back to y'all for a moment. So I have to say that when I first saw that clip, I just had so many mixed feelings, and I was wondering if you guys had some of the same mixed feelings. Like, it's amazing to see. It's amazing to see those amazing performers, first of all. So that's great. The dancing is beautiful. The comedy is well timed and well acted. But even hearing performers who were actually on stage blacking up and then not blacking up say that they liked it was really, I thought, emotionally confusing for me to hear from my modern privileged perspective. So what did you guys think? Did you have any feeling? Like when I first saw it, I didn't want to believe both directions. But it was true that certainly from 1900 to 1920, Black performers on stage had to black up in order to be allowed on stage in front of white audiences, and that lots of that continued through to the 1950s. And one of the things that changed up to the 1950s is in relation to our final reading from this week, which was that Smithsonian article about the male Black soldiers who fought for America in World War II, and that act changed their status somewhat in the United States. So I don't know, did you guys have an emotional reaction to that or any cognitive dissonance? I just remember that I need to start. Go ahead, Audrey.
I think honestly it's probably just all the years of being conditioned to think that they're not worthy unless they do that, like unless they appeal to the mass white audience. And even though they were given the opportunity to not have to do blackface during their performance, I'm sure a lot of them were hesitant and a lot of them were scared to like take that advance, because it, even though like they were given that opportunity, it probably wasn't as well received by white audiences, who then in turn gave them their value. So they were probably psychologically, I'm sure that they were saying like, no, I'm happier doing blackface because it's more comfortable. And a lot of them were scared.
There you go. Yeah, I think you're right. And this question continues, right? And it's sort of the reason why, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it's always the reason why putting money into the equation is such a problem in life in general, right? So there's, of course, these Black performers were amazingly talented. They had value. But once there's tickets that have to be purchased in order to pay for you to do your job, it gets confusing. And that confusion, exactly as you said, Audrey, is layered on top of literally centuries of an entire population of people being oppressed by the white and colonialist institutions and people who, and so how do you in just one generation take a whole community and break free from those like mental and emotional chains that are on everybody that say that one group is not worthy? So I think you're exactly right. Thank you for succinctly saying that. At the end of that excerpt from the PBS documentary that we just watched, the 10 minutes from, they mentioned TOBA, which is the Theater Owners Booking Association is what it actually stands for. And the Theater Owners Booking Association, I'm gonna go ahead and share screen while I talk through this just so that I do get it right. So the Theater Owners Booking Association is, it's originally based on, there was actually a man named Dudley who started a circuit for Black performers in America, but that is not actually what TOBA was in the end. In the end, the TOBA theaters were all white-owned theaters that Dudley worked with some of them and made a partnership, and this basically made a ring of about 85 theaters where Black performing artists could perform a circuit so that you would have a whole full season of travel and pay. And these would be Black artists performing in front of Black audiences. And this is a huge, you can see some of the great names down here. Count Basie, Bessie Smith, Etta Waters, like tons of jazz musicians started on the TOBA circuit. It's also called the Chitlin circuit because it was in the South mostly, so discussing the food. And that brings us to our first reading, which was about the Whitman sisters, who are this amazing family. I think everybody feels pretty enchanted by this story. Tell me if you don't. But so the Whitman sisters are well known for having a touring company that lasted for more than 40 years. They toured all over the United States. They even had one of the sisters broke off and did her own small touring company that went to Europe with some of her quote unquote picks, which we got to pause here and talk about the word pick or pickaninny, which is now considered a derogatory term in this context of pre-vaudeville and minstrelsy. It referred to the child dancers who were on stage in these shows. So if we come back here, there's a little kid dancing. Where's that little kid dancing? It's right around in here. I'm looking for that image. We'll see it or we won't. Right. Where's our little boy? This one. So obviously there's very, very, very little film from this time because we're talking about the turn of the century. So I apologize that there's no film of the Whitman Sisters show, but what it's important to know in general about them are that they were considered a very wholesome and reliable company, in part because the sisters were from Atlanta and they were the daughters of a minister. And that was part of their shtick, as it were. So they presented themselves as a very upstanding theater group, as opposed to other theater groups had a reputation, people in the theater, quote unquote. We'll get back to that in the future. But they were considered a company that you would trust with your child, in fact. So if you had an incredibly talented young child, such as Bojangles when he was a little kid, the Whitman sisters would take your child on tour with them, and they functioned as a family while they were on tour. They would train the talented children and put them on stage. And also the big acts were Alice Whitman, who was one of the best tap dancers of her time, on par with Eleanor Powell, who we saw, I think, a little clip of last week. And then Mabel Whitman she was also the director and the manager of the group. And she was famous for doing things like, it was quite common for a Black company to just show up after having signed a contract through the mail or through telegraph. And then the theater owner would try and skim some off the top or say like, oh, you're not what I expected, or whatever, to cheat them out of money. And the Whitman sisters had so much popularity and could really guarantee a crowd enough that Mabel Whitman was often able to push back and to get the white theater owners to hold to the agreement. And one of the famous examples that you read about this week was when she got there and the theater owner tried to rip off some money, and she had enough wherewithal that she just bought up the week in the theater across the street from this person and took her whole company across the street and sold out across the street, so that the theater that had booked them was then empty and making no money. And this was such an outrageously famous success of sticking it to the Toba that they did not receive the same negative treatment after that point. There's sort of three main points about stereotypes that I want to cover about what the Whitman Sisters show included. So we'll come right back to that, but let's skip ahead here to this Troll and Grosvenor article about blackface and stereotypes. And you might be relieved to hear that we don't have a lot of this really heavy and painful imagery. In the future, we get to lighten up after this stage as we move more into the 1920s. Which kind of share am I doing here? I'm going to switch my screen sharing. Hold on, please. Let's go to desktop. But where is my Toll article? Well, you can read it here. I think this is really one of the best articles I have found about the switch between whites doing blackface minstrelsy and the struggle that it took for the Black artists to take over. We've covered about this idea that the white audiences really were the audiences that could provide a real much higher pay, even on Toba, which is short for tough on Black artists, is what they used to say it meant, or tough on Black asses, because of situations like I just told you about with the Whitman Sisters, where the white theater owners were really still taking advantage of the Black artists who just didn't have any social clout to be able to push back. Like basically the white theater owners would just say, I'll hire someone else, or they could renege on their contract, and the Black artists had neither money nor power nor legal standing to be able to push back against that. So that put all of these Black artists in the position to have to play to the wants and desires of America at the time, which white minstrelsy was absolutely the biggest, hugest entertainment fad that there was at that point. And so it took really, I mean, you could say more than 50 years for us to really get over that, considering from that documentary, we saw that example that was even in the 1960s. There's plenty of people, white people, still doing blackface all the way through the first half of the last century. And so how do you get beyond that? I don't think that most people felt like the artists that were in the end of that video. I think most people wanted to do their performances and wanted to make as much money as possible. And you'll be excited to hear that that's where we're going next. In the 1920s, the jazz age, so many things changed in terms of the feeling of the country about equality, freedom, and self-expression that we get huge leaps forward in civil rights for some. Women got the right to vote. Yay, finally! And we also have the Harlem Renaissance, but we wouldn't have gotten there without working through these stereotypes in the ways that we did during the Great Migration and the beginning of the Jazz Age. So let's go back to the Whitman sisters for a moment here, and let's talk about Bert Whitman. So Bert Whitman was a tap dancer and flash dancer, and by flash dancer I mean she, although we would say they now probably, I don't know, Alberta lived as a woman most of the time, but was known for male impersonation. And their specialty in performing was, of course, a vaudevillian sings, dances, and does comedy. You kind of do everything at once on vaudeville stage. But Bert Whitman specialized in tap, acrobatics, jumping into the splits, like crazy antics on stage, and male impersonation. And so this is this is Bert, Alberta, this is Alberta, this is Alberta, this is Alberta. So it's pretty awesome to see how Alberta, who is a Black woman, is able to perform. I mean, I think I wouldn't necessarily say outside of her class, because she was super, super, super famous. So I think that kind of celebrity meant that even though they were living the hard life of being a touring artist, that they were doing pretty well for themselves. But also not just as a Black male in drag, but also as a Black woman playing a white upper class male in drag. So all of those things were possible. All of the stereotypes Bert could flip. And one of the things that was really amazing about the entire Whitman show that you read about is it would start out with this introduction that introduced the Whitman sisters as savvy business people and morally upstanding descendants from a minister. And then they would go into what the American audiences wanted at the time, which was this mythology of the glorified pastoral plantation life. And so they would have a performance of one of the Whitman sisters posing as a round and warm mother figure, you know, sitting on a cotton bale, but she would be singing about the heartbreak and sorrow of this horrible life as a slave. So while they're giving the audience what they think they want, they're also layering it with some authentic emotional truth that really can drive home the point that this vision of plantation life is really a myth and that it's actually terrible for the slaves. And then they would cheer it up with like a cakewalk and some children dancing in kick lines and doing comedy and some flash dancing. And then there would be an intermission. And this is, this is a pretty regular layout for a vaudeville show. And then after the intermission, the next act would come on. It would be four apparently white women with platinum blonde 1920s hair singing in harmony and performing. And then the show would go on, more acts. Bert would come out, do some flips. There'd be some giant closing numbers where you'd get like everybody on stage doing kick lines and coming out one by one, sort of like, in a Soul Train when people come down and they each do their little signature move. At the end of a big vaudeville show, you'd have the whole cast on stage doing a simple move together on the side, and then you'd have each actor do a one verse reprise of their song or performance. And then people would often leave, and it wasn't very clear whether people understood that the white women that they'd seen in the beginning of the second act were actually the Whitman sisters, and that most of the time the Whitman sisters could and did pass in, like, they weren't wearing blonde wigs, they actually walked around with platinum hair. And so they were within their own show both blacking up and performing as white performers at the same time. And since they had their own management and they had enough economic power, they were able to take all of those myths that the white audiences expected and flip them over and show them to be false at the same time. And I think really that is one of the key things about what makes the Whitman sisters just mind-blowingly epic in terms of vaudeville and how they affected American entertainment. Not to mention that they raised all of these amazing performers and taught them how to be on stage, including Bojangles and including Ethel Waters was one of these performers. So here's a little later. This is from Cabin in the Sky in 1943. We're going to come back to Cabin in the Sky when we talk about Americana, like different ways that performers started to represent being America. But I just wanted to give us this little lovely moment. So Ethel Waters was mostly a singer. You don't really hear about her being a dancer, but ooh, lady, get it, right?
Oh, there's honey in the honeycomb, and baby, there's love.
We got a little social dance, a little tap.
There is love.
And let's continue with a little Ethel, because I think this is a great way to transfer from vaudevillian stage, which don't worry, we're not done with vaudeville, right? Because we've mostly covered like the intro into vaudeville and minstrelsy. But this is Ethel Waters performing Underneath the Harlem Moon. And I want you to listen as best you can to the lyrics.
Real babies walk along with rhythm in their thighs, rhythm in their feet, in their lips and in their eyes. Where do highbrows find that kind of love that satisfies? Underneath our Harlem moon. There's no fields of cotton. Picking cotton is taboo. We don't live in cabins like our old folks used to do. Our cabin is a penthouse now on St. Nicholas Avenue. Underneath our Harlem moon. We just live for dancing We're never blue and forlorn, 'cause it ain't no sin to laugh and grin. That's why we Schwartzes who are born, we shout hallelujah every time we're feeling low. And then we chicks all dressed up like a Georgia gigolo. White folks call it madness, but we call it hiding ho. Underneath our Harlem moon. Once we wore bandanas, now we wear Parisian hats. Once we went barefoot, now we're sporting shoes and spats. Once we were Republicans, but now we're Democrats. Underneath our Harlem moon, we don't think your dot. Picking cotton is taboo. All we pick is numbers, and that includes you white folks too. 'Cause if we hit, then we pay our rent on any avenue. If we get underneath our Harlem moon, we just thrive on dancing. Why be blue and forlorn? We just laugh, grin, let the landlord in. That's why house rent parties were born. We also drink our gin, puff our reefers when we're feeling low. Then we're ready to step out and take charge of any so-and-so. Don't stop the law nor traffic when we're raring to go.
Love it.
Babies want.
So, stop sharing for a hot second here. I love that video and its lyrics because it covers so many things about the changes that were happening after the Great Migration, right? So we were reading last week about Jim Crow laws and how essentially all of these Black folks who had started to be able to participate in society and in politics were being driven back by the new laws that were happening once the Northern Army left the South, and the South was just going back in time again. So huge migration across the country, especially up into Harlem. And I love all the points that she's making in the lyrics of that song, right? That these people are gaining economic status, that they're not barefoot anymore, that they're able to pay their own rent, and also that they're having still this great cultural just richness that everybody wants to get in on, right? They're playing numbers, and the white folks are playing numbers too. They're wearing Parisian hats, they're dancing, they're feeling free, they're feeling self-embodied. And it's also so interesting to look at the way that, haven't seen that movie yet, so that's on my homework since I just found this video. But what are all those gentlemen in suits doing? Are they jurors in and is that a judge behind her? I'm not exactly sure. But that idea is what relates to the other two readings that we had this week. So let me just peep on over here real quick. This farmer article that you read on integration and desegregation, this argument, it's 6 pages, but I think it's so fascinating because I know that when I was in junior college, I read Malcolm X, and this is almost a counter to Malcolm X. And it really expresses something that I think is related to this conundrum of playing into stereotypes or not stereotypes that we were talking about on the vaudeville and pre-vaudeville stage, is also this idea of the argument within the African American community about whether it was possible to actually integrate and become equal, or whether African Americans had to, and some of them really felt this way, that they had to make their own outstanding communities and therefore break out of history in a way so that they could unplug the constant oppression of this false valuation by white audiences or white citizens. If that kind of, how are we doing on understanding that part here? Totally confused or make sense? Or I'd love for you guys to ask me questions about that if that's not clear. Oh, I see a chat. Yay, thanks, Josiah. Yeah, I just think it's so interesting, especially in the context of this continuing question about stereotypes. Yeah, so there's not a whole lot in your quizzes about the integration versus separation argument, but I think it's really a great thing for you guys to be able to read and refer to when we start to do the short essays for your midterm and final, because it gives a really like concrete reference point for how African Americans were thinking about how to change their place in society, right? So that's what that's for. I see I'm running out of time, so I'm going to rush a little bit more. We have also this Smithsonian article, which is about how the African American soldiers in World War I really, like, by fighting, they were trying to answer the same question. Are we equal citizens? Are we going to be treated as equal citizens? And it was both true and untrue. They went to World War I. Men just died. Like, most of that generation of young men was gone. And so when we get to the Jazz Age on the other side of World War I and the Great Migration, we ended up with a bit of a new slate for the Harlem Renaissance, which was a intellectual, artistic, and cultural golden age in African American history and in American history, where in New York City, all of these writers and philosophers and performers were living in Harlem and creating art, work, and politics together to consider this recreation of African American identity in the modern world. And in Harlem, they were setting all the trends in music and dance, and the white vaudevillian stars were actually coming to them to train in Harlem and then taking those acts and dance skills back to the white audiences, white stages, before they had become fully integrated. Because remember, still we had like restrictions on how many Black acts you could have in a vaudeville show in front of a white audience. So we're gonna get to more of that coming up. But I wanted to leave us with, yay, we got through all the readings. I wanted to leave us with this question of now. What does it mean now for Black artists to face stereotypes? So let's start with the first question. What kind of stereotypes are there for Black artists today? And maybe Black artists is a little bit restrictive. How about Black celebrities in general? What kind of stereotypes do you see in modern media today that Black artists have to choose to play along with or not play along with? Go.
A lot of times in like movies and TV shows, there's like this on-running joke about, if you have a Black friend, that they're usually loud and rambunctious, and like they play that part where they're more kind of like aggressive, like the Black person's always down to fight or start a fight or stand up for their friends, which is not like inherently bad. Standing up for your friends is a good thing, but it's just that there's a specific stereotype in which they're always portrayed as like kind of like the aggressor. They're more aggressive than their other friends.
Right. And a stereotype doesn't have to be negative. It's just that a stereotype puts people in a box. And then once you're in a box, you have to fight to get out of that box, right? So some other anybody else want to throw out some Black stereotypes? I know. What fun, right? No. I have a positive ending note, I promise. So for the sake of time, I'm going to fill in some common Black stereotypes are Black athletic star, right? Either on the basketball court or even Tiger Jones. Tiger Jones. Hello. The thug. Yes, exactly. The thug. We still see the thug as a stereotype. How about the stereotype of the wealthy baller who maybe isn't good to his wife, right? So, or, oh gosh, have any of you guys seen The Wire? It was an HBO series 15 years ago, oh gosh, about Baltimore and the crack epidemic. It's really good. In any case, a positive stereotype would be the diva, right? So you could say, even though it absolutely does not cover even 10% of her wondrousness, Beyonce represents a Black stereotype of a female singer who is very much in charge of her business world and is sexually desirable in every way and wealthy. But to fill in the stereotype is often a little relationship emotional sad and has to make lemonade. And yet we know from her art, as well as the fact that she's a real human being, that there's so much more to Beyonce than that. So my point is simply that we're still struggling with the constant conundrum of art both reflecting life and simplifying life, and representing and reflecting the stereotypes that we have in real life, and how those stereotypes both uplift and oppress. Yeah. And I don't think that there's like an answer. My goal is more for us to open our eyes to recognize where stereotypes or echoes of stereotypes or flipped stereotypes are apparent in the art that we see, and to be able to respect the lineage that they came from. So on that note, we're going to come to super modern times, and I'm going to walk us out with super modern, which I'm excited about. I'm going to leave all of these links if you want to watch them again. Okay. So nowadays we have something I'm really excited about, which is Black Futurism, which is a genre that was previously mostly in graphic novels and science fiction novels. And it is this futuristic idea of Black society. Oftentimes it's presented as what would have happened if slavery hadn't really crushed the lives of so many generations upon generations of Black people. And for our closing number, I would like to invite you to one version of Black Futurism, and this is a steampunk musical number. Have you guys seen Jingle Jangle? Did anybody see Jingle Jangle? Yes, no? It's pretty amazing. I see the chat. Yes. So I want to walk us out with this as our positive note, is how we are hopefully finally now creating new ideas about being together, about hybrid dance, right? We have very Victorian costumes here. We have the steampunk genre, but it's also about the success of these amazing Black performers.
He thinks that we can make it work again. I've got a heart that needs to mend, and I don't know how this story ends. Oh, can we make it work again? I know it won't be easy,
but I'm gonna tighten every screw, turn every gear.
I hope this time you'll see me
Working on this formula for years. Wonder if this time it could be real. I'm gonna make it work again. Try to fix every part that's broken. I'm gonna make it work again. Every little hour that I spend is gonna be worth it in the end. If I just get it to work again.
I've come this far without your help, figured it out all by myself. Forgiveness sure ain't easy, don't know what I'm gonna do, or if my heart will find its way to you.
Kind of saying how my story is. I'm gonna make it work again. Gotta make it work again. Kinda saying how my story changes. I'm gonna make it work
I'm not sure if we can make it work again.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to.
So my friends, that is our lecture for today. Hopefully we took ourselves on a bit of a journey from the Great Migration, from the end of Reconstruction, and we're prepped now to look forward to the Jazz Age and some big dance numbers and moving into the 19th century. So any feedback or last comments before we go today? I think I want to come back to that dance scene in there because there's so much hybridization, like so many elements of different types of dances that we're covering, from hip hop to soft shoeing to can. So I think we're gonna like analyze the actual movements in that choreography later on. But I just want to leave a moment for questions, and then if you guys are good for now, thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next week.
Oh, wait, just out of curiosity, I was looking at the Zoom schedule. It says that all future meetings.
I'll switch it back. Unless
Oh,
you
okay.
would prefer this time, I can switch to this time permanently. It's just altering one. Like, you can't alter one at a time for some reason.
I guess like, I mean, I'm fine with like 11:30 to 12:30 if no one, I don't know. I mean, that's just for me. I just saw it and I just figured I'd ask about it.
Maybe I'll send out an email and see what people think. Yes, don't worry, Audrey. There's a whole section on Hamilton coming up. Yes, progressiveness in art, Hamilton casting. So true. We're going to talk about that and feminism. It's coming, I promise. All right, friends, I'm going to let you go. It's been lovely. I hope you had fun. And I will talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.